Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Post, and I'm the Director of External Relations and Council Communications at NCSS. And welcome to our January 28th Social Studies Advocacy webinar. During today's webinar, Katrina McDonald, President of Linchpin Strategies, LLC, will touch on the new congressional landscape context and focus on ESEA Reauthorization and how we can most effectively weigh in with our members of Congress via the appropriations process. For those of you not familiar with Kat, she is the president of Linchpin Strategies, LLC, a firm that specializes in federal legislative policy, strategy, and advocacy in the areas of education, health, and disability. Kat's extensive experience on the Hill is invaluable to NCSS. Thank you for being with us today, Kat.
Thank you, Anna, for that generous introduction. And it's exciting to be kicking off a new year, 2015, with our advocacy webinars. So if you had asked us at the conference last November whether there was going to be a lot of legislative work going on by this point in the year, we probably would have predicted no, that people would be getting themselves organized with the switch of control in the new Congress, but there wouldn't be much legislation moving yet. Well, boy, would we have been wrong. 2015 has started off with a bang, and the Senate is moving out to try to move forward an Elementary and Secondary Education Act reauthorization much faster than anybody would have predicted, really even 4 weeks ago. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about an opportunity to weigh in support of the social studies in this Elementary and Secondary Education Act process. There are a couple of deadlines that are coming up and a terrific opportunity with not a lot of work and not a lot of complicated steps to support the social studies in ESEA. And then we're going to talk a little bit about an opportunity to weigh in around the appropriations process that will happen probably in February or March of this year. So let's dive in and get started. As you know, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as No Child Left Behind, is the large piece of legislation first passed in the mid-60s that lays out how federal funds that support K-12 education may be spent and what states have to do in order to receive those funds. In prior versions and the current law of ESEA, there has been funding provided to support high-quality instruction in the social studies through a couple of different mechanisms. National History Day, the funding for We the People. The problem for us is that all of those funding streams are earmarks, and they're designated in legislation to go to a particular organization. 5 years ago, Congress banned earmarks, which means that even though that authorization is still in the law, the programs cannot be funded. And therefore, we have gone for about the last 5 years without a single penny of federal funding being dedicated to social studies. This legislation, the renewal of ESEA, is our opportunity to change that. And so we're going to be talking about how you can weigh in and lend your voice to do that. New Chairman Alexander of the Senate Help Committee, who is a Republican from Tennessee, has released a draft ESEA legislation bill, which if you are a real policy wonk and are interested, you can go to the Senate Help Committee website and you can pull up the draft legislation. It's about 370 pages long, and it unfortunately does not make any mention of the social studies. Senator Alexander is a former Secretary of Education and a former governor of Tennessee. And he really believes that funding for schools should be given to the states with relatively few requirements or constraints. And then the states ought to decide how best to spend it. And so he does not designate funding going to support instruction in any particular academic discipline, but rather gives money to states to let them choose how it can best be used. We're concerned about that approach for two reasons. The first is we know in schools today, really only the subjects that are tested are the ones that are taught and invested in. And we've seen the erosion of support for the social studies in the years since No Child Left Behind was passed, when the focus has been on literacy and math with a bit of a nod of the head to STEM. We're concerned that if all the funding flows to the states and then the states get to decide how to invest funding in supporting effective instruction, that the money will all or mostly go to literacy, math, maybe a little bit to STEM, but social studies will largely be left out. The other reason that we're concerned about a state-based approach is we know that even within a single state, there are children with many different needs and communities with different needs, and that a state one-size-fits-all approach to supporting social studies instruction is no more effective and responsive to the diversity of needs than a federal one-size-fits-all approach would be. If money is given to 50 states, and at least some portion of those states do invest in supporting effective instruction in the social studies, there's no state that will have money to support a variety of approaches that can respond to a variety of needs. At best, we would end up with 50 state programs. And honestly, given that most states won't invest in the social studies, probably what we'll get is a handful of states that each develop one approach. Our preference, which has been reflected in NCS's support for the Sandra Day O'Connor Act and for the programs of national significance in prior ESEA reauthorization, is to have the Department of Education fund making a menu of various approaches that have been validated as effective available to states. So the way that we would prefer to have support for social studies move forward would be for the Department of Education to accept grants from nonprofit organizations and fund a menu of different approaches that have been demonstrated to be effective. And then schools and school districts could look at this menu of approaches that has been validated as being effective in different communities. And those students those schools and those school districts should be able to choose the approach that best meets their needs. That way, we won't have a federal one-size-fits-all. We also won't have a state one-size-fits-all. And certainly, we wouldn't have states where no social studies resources are available at all. As I mentioned, we did have language in prior drafts of the ESEA reauthorization supporting what's called programs of national significance. And the Alexander draft that has been released also provides funding for the Department of Education to give grants to nonprofits to support what the Department of Education considers programs of national significance. What the Alexander draft does not have, that Senator Enzi, a Republican of Wyoming, wrote in 2011, and what Senator Enzi was successful in including in the draft legislation that passed the Senate Help Committee, was a specific program of national significance for civics. So what we are asking for in this reauthorization process is that Senator Alexander, Chairman Alexander, pick up the language that Senator Enzi drafted and the committee accepted in 2011 and include it in his bill so that there would be direct instruction to the Department of Education to fund programs of national significance in the area of civics. And with a nod to the National Council for the Social Studies and others, we are also asking that Senator Alexander include funding for history. Now, Senator Alexander, as I mentioned, has published his draft legislation and is inviting comments by February 2nd, which is early next week. And so we are asking folks in the social studies community to please weigh in. And it's actually really easy and straightforward to do that. You should have received from NCSS a voter voice that has a sample letter for you to add your name to, and with one click, you can send a request to your 2 United States senators, asking them to please weigh in with Chairman Alexander and support the ENSEA Program of National Significance language with the addition of history. It takes less than 5 minutes. It's very simple and straightforward. And if you have not received or cannot find in your inbox the NCSS Voter Voice email with that link, you can certainly be in touch with the NCSS office and they can make sure that you get that. We would urge you to take that 5 minutes and fill that out, and don't wait until February 2nd. And if you are a council chair or connected with others in your community who might not be NCSS members, but who care about this, please urge them to also contact their senators with the same request. So we've gotten a couple of questions about the current funding and also about why NCSS, in concert with other social studies organizations, has chosen to pursue this approach to the legislation instead of a couple of other possibilities. So I'm going to pause here to respond to those questions. One question is, how much funding is there for social studies in the current federal budget? And as I mentioned, all of the current programs that fund the social studies are designed as earmarks, and so they have all been defunded. And currently, there is not a single penny in the federal government that is specifically designated for the social studies. Another question that we received is, why in the NCSS language have we focused on history and civics and not being specific about including geography and economics? The answer is not that NCSS does not care about geography or economics. In our conversations with folks on Capitol Hill, we have found that civics and history has gotten the most positive response and gained the most traction. And that's why we have focused on those 2 disciplines in our ask. Having said that, in some of our communications, particularly around appropriations, we have not been specific about history and civics. We have asked for funding more broadly for the social studies. And I'll talk about that in a little bit greater detail when we talk about our appropriations request. Another question that we've received is, why are we focusing on the Programs of National Significance section of the legislation, as opposed to Section 1111, which describes the state plans that have to be submitted. The state plans section of Senator Alexander's bill requires that states outline how they will instruct students in literacy, in math, in STEM, and in any other subject that the state considers to be important or that it wants to include in its plan. And we've received a question, shouldn't we be pushing hard for social studies to be included with math, literacy, and STEM? I would never suggest that that is not something that you should ask for. And certainly it would be helpful to have a requirement that states have to outline their plan for instruction in the social studies. However, this is not an area where we have gotten much response or traction. There is a great deal of resistance on the part of the chairman and his staff to including any other subject beyond STEM history, beyond STEM literacy and math. And they feel that if they include social studies for us, then they will also have to include the arts and other subjects, and they are working very hard to keep the list very short. So if you want to add to your request, the request that social studies be added to the state plans, I would never discourage you from doing that. But NCSS and other organizations that are supporting funding for social studies has made the difficult decision to focus very specifically on the programs of national significance, since that is the area where we were able to get some traction in the 2011 process with a Republican champion, which is important to us here. There's a second way in which you can deliver this message, not to your senators specifically, but rather to Chairman Alexander and his staff. There is an email address that has been set up, and it will also be available until February 2nd. It is fixingnclb@help.senate.gov. We have not encouraged thousands of people to send emails to that email address asking for the inclusion of social studies language in the programs of national significance, because we want to make sure that individual senators' offices hear from the largest number of constituents possible. However, if you have already communicated with your Senate office and you would like to provide feedback to Chairman Alexander's staff, you can adapt the letter and send it to this email address, fixingnclb@help.senate.gov. We would encourage folks who do that to do it on behalf of an organization. So, for example, NCSS will be sending a letter to that email address. If you are the chair of your state council or another social studies organization in your community, we would encourage you to consider writing a letter on behalf of that organization instead of as an individual. But if you have time and interest and you have already communicated with your Senate offices, we would certainly encourage you to also send a note to the Fixing NCLB at help.senate.gov. I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if anybody has any further questions about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act process. It is moving forward faster in the Senate than it is in the House. We know that House Chairman Klein will also be releasing a draft probably in the next couple of weeks, and we expect that social studies will not be included in the House legislation, just as it was not included in the Senate draft. So once the House draft comes out, we will be getting back in touch with you through voter voice and encouraging you to be in touch with your House members as well. If you have a relationship with your House office, particularly if your representative is on the Education and Workforce Committee, we would encourage you to be in touch with them now and not wait until that draft comes out. But once the draft does come out, we will make it very easy for you with a voter voice email. So I don't see any further questions, so I'm going to move on to the appropriations process. Appropriations is, at least theoretically, a very regular process with multiple steps. So next Monday, the president will be releasing his budget proposal for funding government-wide. As NCSS, we spend the end of the year and the beginning of the next year developing our appropriations ask. And then January and February is the time to be introducing that ask on Capitol Hill. We're identifying our congressional champions and working to generate grassroots support. And then one piece that's particularly important is sometime in February or March, that deadline for this year has not been established yet, congressional offices will have an opportunity to send their own request letters. And members of Congress, if they choose, can write a letter to each of the 10 chairmen of the Appropriations subcommittees and give priorities and requests for the programs that are funded in each subcommittee's legislation. The subcommittee will hold hearings in the late spring, and then if things go the way they are supposed to, which they almost never do, they're almost always late, but if they go the way they're supposed to, then the House would mark up, amend, and move forward its bill over the course of the summer. And the Senate would do the same, usually continuing into September. And then the House and Senate should negotiate an agreement by the end of the fiscal year. And that usually slips into October and November. So there are two really critical times to be communicating with congressional offices. One is early in the year when they are putting together their requests and wish lists. And then the second is over the summer as the process heats up, as decisions are being made and as final legislation gets put into place. We have a new opportunity, a really exciting new opportunity for progress in appropriations in 2015 that we have not had before. There is a new Republican chairman of the House Labor, Health, and Education Appropriations Subcommittee, Tom Cole of Oklahoma. And the thing that is really exciting about Mr. Cole is that he has been our chief Republican supporter and champion in the House of Representatives in trying to secure funding for effective instruction in civics. And he is the House Republican co-sponsor of the Sandra Day O'Connor Act. So he has indicated to us that he would like to put some money into his bill for supporting effective instruction in civics. But he has also indicated to us that he needs help. He needs to be able to go to other members of his subcommittee, and when he puts money into the bill for civics, he needs to be able to say that not only is it something that's a high priority for him, but 30 or 40 or 50 other members of Congress, Republican and Democratic, have asked him for this money and have made it a priority in their request list. So that's where you come in. We need your help in reaching out to your congressional offices, most particularly your House offices, before the appropriations deadline, so that your House offices will include a request for social studies when they contact Chairman Cole with their priority list. So working through the appropriations process is a little more complicated than working through ESEA. We'll be circulating a voter voice when we get closer to the deadline, but you can't do it solely through a voter voice. We still believe that, especially this year with this new chairman, it is vitally important to do this. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time to walk through the process, which, as I said, for appropriations is a little more complicated than ESEA, but it's still pretty simple when you understand how it works. So the first thing, what are we asking for in the appropriations process? And the request in appropriations is a little different from the request in ESEA. Why is that? The appropriations process can only fund programs as they exist in current law. Once the ESEA bills are signed into law, the Appropriations Committee will fund activities in K-12 education as outlined in the new ESEA. We don't know whether these bills moving through the House and Senate will actually finish the process. And we don't know if they do finish the process, whether the president will sign them into law or not. So until that happens, the Appropriations Committee has to fund legislation according to existing law. There's only one place in existing law that can fund the menu of validated approaches that we have been talking about. And that is a program called the Fund for the Improvement of Education. The Fund for the Improvement of Education is a broad category of grants that allows the Department of Education to award money to nonprofit organizations that have demonstrated an ability to improve instruction in various aspects of K-12 education. It's a very flexible funding stream, but the exciting thing about it is if the Appropriations Committee provided the money, the Department of Education could award grants now under the Fund for the Improvement of Education to do what we are asking to do. So, Anna, if you want to move on to the next slide, the NCSS legislative request in appropriations is $30 million in the Fund for the Improvement of Education, which is also known on Capitol Hill as FIE, for competitive grants to nonprofits to improve the teaching of history, and $30 million in the Fund for the Improvement of Education for competitive grants to nonprofits to improve the teaching of civics. And again, as I mentioned previously, we have been specific about history and civics because those are the two fields where we have gotten the greatest traction. It is not that we don't care about geography or economics, but we have chosen to focus our political capital on the two subjects where we think we have the greatest chance of making this work. As I said, the FIE grants would work the same way that we would envision the Program of National Significance to work. So it would give money to nonprofits to disseminate validated approaches and create a menu from which schools and school districts could choose, allowing them to pick the approaches that best meet the needs of their students. So, Anna, if you want to move to the next slide, I think we've touched already on why history and civics and what happened to geography and economics. But the last question I want to respond to is, what about the SEED program? Because many people on this webinar have been terrific in reaching out to their congressional offices and to the Department of Education about the SEED grants. So why are we switching in this appropriations ask from the SEED grants, which we've been talking about for the last year or two, to the Fund for the Improvement of Education? The reason for that is the SEED program is not really a very good fit for civics and for social studies. The SEED program grants are really intended to go to very large national organizations that have staff and offices in a majority of the states. And in civics, we have history, geography, and economics. We have much smaller nonprofits, which may have a regional presence, and some of them certainly have national reach, but they don't have a physical presence in multiple states. So while we were grateful that Congress gave us a nod in the SEED grant language, it's really not a great fit for social studies. And we're very concerned that the other criteria included in the SEED grants may prevent highly qualified, strong applications from the social studies community from being funded. That's why we would really prefer to have the funding in FIE and not in SEED. So for the last 2 years, Congress has given us money, or at least said that SEED money could be spent for grants in the area of the social studies. And we are trying to be grateful to Congress for making that clear in the legislation, but we're concerned that just the way the SEED program works may prevent funding from being awarded to nonprofits in the field of social studies. So with a chairman who's much more focused on this, we are going back to our original request, which is please fund this through the Fund for the Improvement of Education. The criteria under FIE are much better suited to funding the social studies. Okay, so if you want to be engaged in this, and I certainly hope that you do, and I hope I haven't scared you off, what do you need to do? How do you make a request? So sometime in the next couple of weeks after the president's budget comes out, congressional offices will start to put together their request letters. A deadline for those request letters will be announced, and we'll let you know what it is. It used to be that you could just write to a congressional office and say, I think you should support money in the Fund for the Improvement of Education to help improve instruction in the social studies. And they would take that and put it into their letter, and it was really very simple and straightforward. In recent years, that process has changed a little bit. It's gotten much more formal, and it's still not hard to access. You just need to know how to do it. So each congressional office has created an appropriations request form. They're usually available on the website, although congressional offices can make it hard to find the form on the website because they might not want, every constituent in their district to be sending in appropriations requests. However, the vast majority of congressional offices do have the form on the website, and if you spend a little bit of time on the website for your House and Senate offices, you can often find it. If you're having difficulty finding the form on the website, it's not hard to pick up the phone and call the congressional office and ask if they can send it to you. You might want to use it as an opportunity to talk to the staff person who handles education appropriations. And if you get them on the phone, you could give them a little pitch about why funding for the social studies is important when you ask them if they can tell you how to find the form. And that's a great way to sort of help to develop a relationship with that staff person. But if all you want to do is get the form, typically the person who answers the phone at the front desk can help you find it. And again, most of them have it online. Occasionally, you will come across an office that has made a decision not to submit appropriations requests, especially if you are in a district that is represented by a very conservative Republican who's concerned about the deficit. He or she may have made a pledge to constituents not to ever ask for money in appropriations. The number of offices that do that is small, but if you are in one of those districts, then you'll probably need to talk to your senators because there's not much of a way around that. However, at this point, more than 80% of House and Senate offices still submit appropriations requests. So once you get the form, what's it going to ask you for? Well, the forms are usually short. They're typically one page, although a couple of offices have longer ones. And the thing to remember as you fill it out is that you don't necessarily need to answer every question. The forms are generic and they cross the subcommittees. So, for example, if you are submitting a request in the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, you need to know what budget line you're asking for money in. For labor HHS, they don't need a budget line. If you tell them the Fund for Improvement of Education, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. But because the form is generic and not specific to a particular subcommittee, it has to include information that's needed for all subcommittees. So, for example, if you are going through the form and it asks you for the budget line number, don't panic. You don't need to fill that in. In fact, it typically takes less than 15 minutes to fill out the form. It is not difficult. And again, just as we would love to have you share the request for ESEA with others in your state and your council and encourage them to contact their senators. If you come up with the appropriations form and fill it out for your senators or for your representative, we would urge you to share that document with other people in your community who care a lot about instruction in the social studies and have them send it to their members of Congress too. So what exactly are they going to ask you? The first question they ask is always your name, your organization, your email address, and they might ask you for your street address because often they want to determine whether or not you're a constituent. They will ask you which appropriations subcommittee your request is in, and your answer is Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education, and the shorthand for that is Labor HHS. They will ask you what program or account you're asking for money in, and we are asking for money in the Fund for the Improvement of Education. Then they'll ask you what the purpose of the funding is. And typically they limit you. They don't want you to go on too long, but they want you to explain why this money is needed. And you can copy and paste information that has been shared by NCSS about the need for funding to improve instruction in the social studies and help support teacher effectiveness in the social studies. And they'll ask you how much you're asking for. We would encourage you to ask for $30 million in FIE for civics and $30 million for history. And you can combine those and make it one $60 million request, or you can make it two requests, $30 million for civics and $30 million for history. The forms might ask if this is the same as last year, if the money was included in the president's budget. It would be an increase over last year, and the president's budget has never included funding for the social studies, so we don't anticipate that when it comes out on Monday that it will, but we will definitely keep you posted. And then it will ask you, do you have specific bill or report language that you are looking for? And if it asks you about that, you can leave it blank. If you get the form and there's an unexpected question and you don't know how to answer it, we are here to help. You can certainly email me. You can email Anna Post in the NCSS office, and we are happy to supply information. You can also call the congressional office and say, I'm not sure what to put here. What is it that you're looking for? And it very well may be that you can leave it blank, that the reason you're not sure what to put is because it's a question that doesn't apply to the social studies request. So as you can see, it is a little more time consuming and a little more complicated to make a request through the appropriations process. Again, I can't emphasize how important we believe this is, particularly this year and particularly in the House of Representatives. For the first time since I've been working with NCSS, we have a chairman of the funding committee who is predisposed to be helpful to us and has been clear that he wants to be helpful, but he needs the support of his colleagues in order to do that. And it is up to you as social studies champions and constituents of members of Congress to help get the support that Chairman Cole has asked us for. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you. I'm going to pause here and see if there are folks who have any questions. And again, the most urgent request right now is to meet the February 2nd deadline for input to the Senate on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act reauthorization. It's not quite time to be doing the same for ESEA in the House, and it will be a couple of weeks before we know what the appropriations deadlines are. But since this is the last webinar we'll have before the ESEA and appropriations deadlines hit, we wanted to outline for you what those processes and what those timelines are. And you will be getting NCSS communications over the coming months as the opportunities to weigh in emerge and as the deadlines become clear. So do we have any questions about all of this information that I've just thrown at you? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room, but I'm going to give it another minute or two in case folks have long questions that they are typing out. Anna, in the absence of any questions, I'm thinking that everybody on the webinar is just ready to write and champion social studies with their congressional offices, and that this is all going to be in the bag this year.
I am so excited to think in that manner as well. And please, as Kat mentioned, do not hesitate to contact her, to contact me. We will do everything we can to assist you in this process. It's a very important process. We are also going to be posting this webinar ASAP, and that's probably going to be, there's going to be a link available tomorrow, probably late morning. So if you want to refer friends, family, networks to watch this webinar and be guided, we would greatly appreciate it. I'm going to disseminate it broadly as well through our networks and our electronic networks mainly, but just know this is available as well as an additional resource. If you have questions after the webinar, please don't hesitate to be in touch. And let me share also with you the upcoming webinars for the year. There's going to be one in April. It's going to be a case study, Civics for All, and another one in July, and another one in October. So we hope that you will mark your calendar and join us once more. I don't see any other questions coming through. And so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and just thank you for participating and for, 1 second, I'm seeing one more question. Let me see if, one moment. Nope, no additional questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon and be in touch if you have questions. Take care. Bye-bye.